Hey YouTube, here I am once again bringing you my final, air quotes, final Green Kid deck profile. So I said that my previous deck profile was what I had decided to commit to win all matchups, and I haven't really given an update since then. It's been a couple weeks. However, the reason for that being that when I was playing that deck list over and over and over again, I had realized that there was a huge glaring weakness in how my locals have kind of slowly adapted and changed as well. So there's been more of a representation of purple Kaido. There's been a more strong representation of the mirror match. Blue is definitely still a very strong threat that I have to be dealing with. And so, even though I said that I was probably going to be able to ride that last deck list into another 3-0 to get my fifth winner card, which I do now have, I was actually sorely mistaken because of the changes that had to occur. And so, rather than having a deck profile for something that is not going to win me games given the current climate of where I was, I have now readapted my deck to fit the meta and the play style that I've kind of had to kind of develop in order to find success again. So I was finding that against purple specifically, my matchup was absolutely atrocious. There were games where they wouldn't even find Onigashima, and I was still losing because of ramp triggers or something of the sort. And they're against purple, who are seeing Onigashima turn one. It was just straight up impossible. And so I've had to readapt my deck to kind of fit around that in order to kind of give myself the chance I needed to win. And so I guess you could say the previous deck profile was okay into all matchups, but this one is definitely patching up all of the holes that were left by kind of being a little bit not perfectly prepared for what I'm expecting. And so we're going to start this off. We have the 4 Jewelry Bonnie. Of course, this is a use this kid deck. So many of your key cards are Supernova. It's going to be use this kid. It's going to be the you'll see I've actually re-added the 7-drop kid. We have Trafalgar Law back in the deck. We have Basil Hawkins, of course, and we all obviously have cards like Killer, Capone, the blockers. And so it's going to be finding you all of the key cards. Bonnie is like definitely the best searcher in this deck, which is why she is a mandatory 4 of. Next, we have found space for the third Momonosuke. We are running Paradise Waterfall, and I'll explain that later as to why that had to get re-added. But the Momonosuke here is a very strong card for finding all the Wano cards. Very frequently, if I feel like I need to see Okiku really early, and I'm going turn 2, I will just play the Momonosuke and use it immediately. Sometimes I'll hold off on using cards like Bonnie or Momo depending on my hand, just to try and gauge like, is the card advantage later going to be more important than finding key cards now, right? And in the case of something like Momo finding Okiku, that's typically a very very strong play. And so I might just let the Momo one for one for the Okiku, because I think the Okiku will see much more value and it'll be worth the gamble. But typically for cards like Bonnie, I don't necessarily shoot at shotgun all the time. There's not a particular card that I'm always looking for, but depending on the matchup and depending on the timing, I might have to try to Bonnie to find like an 8-cost kid versus blue or something along those lines. So great consistency cards. They even have 1K counters if they're getting a little redundant in your hand. So it's just excellent cards all around. Next up, we have the key blockers, the basic chump blockers of the deck. We have the Capone and the Killer. The Killer ability, of course, Dawn Attach 1. You get the draw card if he blocks, as long as you have 3 or more guys on the field, which can be played around depending on what kind of outs exist. Gum Gum Jet Pistol, or like Rest in the Killer, I guess it could be another one. But there's even cards like Brachio Bomber, etc., etc. There is like a bit of spot removal, but typically it's an okay idea to just give the killer a card, give the killer a Dawn, so you can get an extra card. And then of course Capone is just the 1-for-1 blocker. Of course, these guys are really important for making sure your 8-drop kid is basically invincible. And it's they're just blockers in general. They're relatively cheap, so I mean, why would you not play them? And the killer even has a 1K counter if the 2 cost is just a little bit too much, which it definitely can be sometimes. Next up, for defense, we have actually cut Beppo. We only are playing the Apu and the Izo as the 2K counters in this deck now. So Beppo I removed because in order to really keep my deck prepared for most matchups, but simultaneously, um, we have to add new cards. We have to add more cards so the deck is consistent enough against the matchups that I need to see it in. But unfortunately, Beppo just couldn't make the cut anymore because it's when you need to see key cards, you need to see the key cards, right? And so in order, I have to add more cards in order something has to get taken away. And Beppo is just he's the most generically good, but he's like it just being a 2K counter. But he's not the card that's winning me games, and so I needed to add more win conditions that were feasible to find. So I just had to cut the Beppo. We only play the Apu for the 2K counter, searchable off Bonnie. Pretty solid card. Next up, so one of the reasons that the Momo was important to bump up is because we are actually now playing 4 Nekomamushi as opposed to 3. I have a 4th box topper to fix that mismatching rarity. It'll come in soon, I hope, but the package got delayed, so we'll have to see on that. But we are now playing 4 Nekomamushi. We're now playing 4 Izo. And we have the 4 Okiku. So we've maxed out on the general Wano wrestling package here. And we even have one more addition in the Straw Sword. We are only playing the 1 of Straw Sword now as opposed to 2 Straw Swords. Because, again, Straw Sword at 2, it's good, but you don't need to see Straw Sword that much, especially when you're establishing a stronger board presence. The Straw Sword is really good at cracking boards by surprise, but it's not really like a mandatory card to see in order to win the game. And the reason I'm still opting to play the single Straw Sword is because all these resters are Wano cards and therefore are findable off Momonosuke, but Straw Sword is not. Bonnie has no way of finding a rester unless it is exactly Straw Sword. And so I am playing the 1 of Straw Sword. I could find a way to bump it up to 2, I'm sure. But for now, it's been pretty comfortable for me to play it at this ratio. I find it off Bonnie, and when I see it in a matchup or a board state in which I feel like it's useful, I'll pick it up. And if not, usually there's a way around it that I don't necessarily need to rely on the Straw Sword in order to win. But, just generally, Okiku, incredible card. If you see it off Momonosuke, you're usually grabbing it. If you see Izo 2K counter, good to have for defense, very versatile card, and can rest the 4 cost, pretty decent in the blue matchup. Nekomamushi, really important in the green mirror match, which is why I've upped him to 4. So he's good against Law, and he's good against Kid primarily. And I've bumped him up to 4 because just trying to find him, the green mirror match is an extremely deep matchup in which different card combinations are going to make going either first or second better. So it's hard to say which you want to do in the green matchup, whether you want to go first or second. But obviously because you're not picking it approximately half the time, you kind of need a hand that can be prepared for either or. And so Nekomamushi is really good at resting Okiku, resting blockers, resting like things like Bonnie and Momonosuke, etc., etc. And it's even really good in like a lot of other matchups where there's small guys that you need to be resting. And so the Nekomamushi I bumped up to 4 because seeing him in your opening hand is very important for specific matchups. And so I just decided that even though he's a little clunky sometimes, he's still a 1K counter, it can be worth seeing. So yeah, these are the guys that are resting all the cards. This is like the main engine of the deck for board control early game. This is kind of like how you establish your advantage in general. So very strong stuff. Those cards are definitely very, very good. And obviously you could cut Neko 1, you could maybe cut Okiku 1, even depending on how your deck is. But I personally really like seeing those cards, especially in the early mid game. And so I'm maxing out on all of them at this point. So we are also playing the 2 Killer. This card is very useful at sniping things when your opponent has like a blocker setup and stuff like that. It's really good at baiting advantage from the opponent. Obviously, it's not good in every single matchup, The 1K counter though, just it's easy to justify just because it still has the counter power attached, so it's relatively fine. The one thing that I would say is that there are matchups where this card is very useless in, and so if you're struggling in those matchups, which would be specifically stuff like purple, it's not the best in against blue. I would say that it would be reasonable to cut the killer and play a card like a Raizo. I know a lot of people in the comments have been asking me recently, like, where's Raizo? Do you play Raizo? Why don't you play Raizo? The reason I don't play Raizo personally is because I personally find him to be not super impactful, and he's like kind of redundant. So to me, Raizo is a card where he's either really broken in board states where you're already like extremely established. Like if you have an 8 drop kid and a Raizo on board, you're just gaining cards every turn. But to me, it's like I don't know how you got to that point and you aren't like playing like Bonnie or Momonosuke to do kind of the same thing. I guess there's a chance that those cards can whiff and Raizo can't really whiff. He's just drawing more cards. But typically, if you have an 8 cost kid established and you have like the killers and stuff, there's still opportunities to be drawing because of the blocker killers. And so I don't really see a need for Raizo. I think that the card advantage that he gives you in the states in the board states that he's really useful in is a little bit overkill. I don't really think you need it. Like personally, like obviously if you have Raizo and a searcher, with the 8 drop kid, and you're playing a matchup like red or blue where they're trying to get over the 8 drop kid, they're going to deplete your defensive resources a little bit faster than you're going to be able to gain them with just one Bonnie or just one Momo. And so the Raizo kind of like mitigates that. But I find that typically the tempo of the game, like you'll be depleting in resources, but you'll also be taking life in the meantime. And so like I've just never found that the Raizo card advantage has been necessary for me to be winning games per se. I found that it's been good enough to just not play Raizo, and I don't really think otherwise he facilitates that much. Like if you have an Okiku and a Raizo in your hand, like are you gonna play Okiku or are you gonna play Raizo, right? Like I don't really think that Raizo is a huge deal. Um, it's just fine. Like it's I think it's a good card, and I definitely think it could see a spot in the deck, especially because Raizo is definitely a card where people get scared of like drawing the card. The card advantage. People try to out the Raizo. They find that it's worth prioritizing hitting the Raizo because obviously drawing cards is something that's like just busted in most card games. But in this build, I didn't really think that he was that necessary. I personally just like playing the killer because I prefer my playstyle prefers to deny the opponent advantage over establishing my own. So for me, like the killer just kind of fits how I play more. But I definitely think if you replace him with Raizo, I could see that being reasonable. And so next up we have the 5 drops. So we're playing 3 Basil Hawkins. This card is absolutely insane in the mirror match. He's really good against blue. He's good against red. I mean, generally he's just good against like everything really. Even purple, I would say that he's okay. He's a little bit worse in purple, but he's still worth playing in purple. Basil Hawkins pretty much good in like every matchup. I think honestly, like I can't really think of one where he's like particularly bad. Um, yeah, he's just a 5 cost that restands. So like you hatch one Dawn and he swings for 7 twice effectively. Like if they have rested cards, typically if they have like a board state, it depends on the matchup too. But like against purple, you have to play really really aggro with this deck. Like so incredibly aggro. Like you're even like trashing Okiku from your hand to leader ability on like turn 2 in the purple matchup. So it's like sometimes I'll swing just straight up at leader with the Hawkins at 7 at Kaido just because. But generally, like even if they already have a king established and you play the Hawkins over, they have cards around it like Brachio Bomber, 9 cost Kaido, etc. But there will be a gap if they see Onigashima turn 1 and then they king turn 2, or I guess Onigashima 2 king 3 on turn 4. Um, on turn 4 they should only have 8 Dawn because it'll -1 from the king that turn, so they'll only have 8 on the next turn, so they can't 9-drop this. So if they have the Brachio, they have the Brachio, but the Hawkins is still worth playing in the purple matchup. He's good in like every matchup, so it's just a key card that you want to be seeing. He has no counter, and he can get clunky if you see him in multiples. You usually don't really need to see more than one Hawkins in order to win the game, but I would rather see a second Hawkins than get 0 Hawkins when I needed him, so I'm playing him at 3. I have cut down the Yamato to 1. I do think actually that this could be cut for a different card at this point. The reason I cut the Yamato down to 1 is because I'm actually playing two. I actually think the Yamato, the first thing I would cut it for, if I were to cut it, would be a third Paradise Waterfall, because I am playing 2, along with the 3 Law. But going back to Yamato really fast before I get into those cards, I think that Yamato is really good if you play really, really aggro. If you overcommit the Dawn to the Yamato to bust through the opponent's life, they basically lose the opportunity to see 2 cards. So, like, if you were to attach 4 to Yamato, 9k, and they don't have Dawn up to play an event, they have to burn 3 cards or lose 2 from their life, and the cards in the life get trashed. So it puts the opponent in like a really bad position. If you're trying to, so the places where the Hawkins is bad is actually where the Yamato is really good. So aside from matchups like purple, where you're just gonna swing with the Hawkins regardless, the Yamato is really good. Well, first of all, Yamato is good into purple unless they have blockers established, and that's kind of the reason I cut it down to 1 is because in order for Yamato to really go through, you need like a specific board state where their board is empty and they don't have blockers, or they have a blocker and you're able to rest it and then commit the Dawn to hit the Yamato. But it's just like after a certain point, it's just kind of like it's difficult to get this card like really well established. But regardless, it's still useful to see, because if you are to play the Yamato because you're able to, the opponent will force themselves to deal with this Yamato. And so it gives you kind of like a reprieve in a sense, like in a turn. And if you don't, it's still like 1k counter, still useful. It's searchable off Momonosuke. So it's not like impossible to find in this deck, because we up the Momo count, therefore it'll be easier to find a Yamato in theory as well. So very good. We have the Trafalgar Law here back again, because we're playing the 4 Nekomamushi again, and because I was struggling with purple. One of the things that was important for me to note is that 5 costs in purple is much harder to out than like a 3 cost like a Shachi. So before I was playing Shachi, and I'm also playing the Paradise Waterfall, and so obviously Paradise Waterfall combos extremely well with Trafalgar Law, because a lot of people are going to be swinging with 7, and so if you block with Law Paradise Waterfall, he becomes 8, so he survives, and then he untaps so that he can block again. And similarly, even if you don't have Law, Waterfall is good with these guys too, because Hawkins again 6k, like if they are swinging at Hawkins for like 7 or whatever, or even 8, you could just Waterfall another card in hand and then protect the Hawkins. Same thing with Yamato. Yamato, you like 2k counter whatever Paradise Waterfall, they have to overcommit the Dawn in order to kill these guys if you have the Waterfall live. Like I said though, Waterfall, I could bump it up to 3. I think that the card does perform extremely well. And if I had to cut a card immediately, it would just be the Yamato, so that my Wano numbers don't change for the Momonosuke searches. But really strong card. And it's particularly really good with the 7-drop kid as well that we've re-added in. So I've mentioned before that the matchups I've been playing against are green and purple. 7-drop kid is good in green. I would not deem him necessary, but he is good in green. Good into the green matchup in the green mirror match, and he's excellent versus Kaido. So one of the reasons why he's so good into Kaido is because against Kaido, it's not really easy to... The way the pace of the match works against Kaido is you're trying to play aggro, right? You're throwing away Okiku because you just want to swing with the leader now. You need to like swing with the Hawkins immediately as fast as possible before he loses value. They have a lot of ways to out cards, and so you need to be seeing value from cards as soon as possible. And so the 7-drop kid is going to be, in general, a faster card to see value from than the 8-drop kid, because he can block the turn he's played. Very frequently, you actually want to play the 8-drop kid and keep him on board so that you have the Dawn available next turn in order to protect him. So frequently, the 8-drop kid in the purple matchup is too slow to be played, but the 7-drop kid you can start seeing value from basically immediately. So he is a blocker, as opposed to the 8-drop kid who just like kind of taunts the opponent. But if you have the ability, you can still play 7-drop kid, swing with your leader for 7 that turn, which is again good against Kaido, and then you still have 1 available if you have the Paradise Waterfall. So you can, if they attack with King or whatever, you block Paradise Waterfall, restand against King, and the kid will just restand, and he'll be able to either be used again for an attack next turn, or he'll be able to apply more defense if you're at threat of being killed that turn. So it's just, it was very, very important for me to see this card against purple. Obviously against blue it's like next to useless. And in the mirror match, it's better than not mandatory in the mirror, but it is good to see. So it was pretty easy to justify. It's not perfect into the blue matchup, which is why I cut it before, but I found that the purple matchup is too relevant for me to ignore. I need to be teching specifically for purple because it's that important. And it does definitely make the difference. I played this against the purple player at the event where I won my 5th winner card, and that was the one time I beat him. So I mean, there you go. Very, very relevant card to see. Again, searchable off Bonnie. It's only a 2, so you're not expecting to see him every single game, but along with the Bonnies, the hope is that you will see this card through Bonnie, and if it's in a matchup where I think it's relevant, I will prioritize the 7 over the 8. But of course, the 8-drop kid is no card to scoff at. This card is absolutely insane. We are, of course, playing 8-drop kid because, I mean, his ability is just absolutely matchup breaking. I was testing him 2-2 like I was in my original build that you might have seen. You actually may notice that this build is even closer to that build than my previous one was, so I'm kind of backtracking a little bit, but because I'm a better player now and I kind of understand the matchups deeper and the interactions better, I recognize the value of this card is extremely high. So in my original video, I actually mentioned that I felt like the 8 and 7 drop kids were a little bit overrated, but now that I have cut like the Beppos for the defense, I'm like changing my ratios around, my blockers and everything, I'm starting to understand the reason why this card is important. And it's because if you're playing cards like the 7-drop kid, your chances of seeing him and 8-drop kid are basically equal. And the thing is that this card is the reason why you beat Zoro. This card is the reason why you beat blue. In those matchups, it doesn't really matter super hard what the rest of your hand looks like at the time. If you find the 8-drop kid, you're probably going to win that match. And so the reason that we're a little bit weaker to blue, it's okay to be weaker to blue by running the 7-drop. The law is not great into blue either, not the best. He's like okay. It doesn't really matter. It's very irrelevant because if you are to find this card, then the other cards are just fodder for your leader to swing behind the kid. So ultimately, we're playing him at 3. We've bumped him up because it's the same as the last build, but it's bumped up from the original build. He wins games on his own. And so if you can find him, it's going to be good enough. You don't have to stress. You don't have to worry. It makes the blue matchup very easy. Red matchup, it gives you a very, very incredible advantage. And so we have to keep him at 3. He has to be very easy to find because we need to see him in certain matchups in order to really have our edge. But ultimately, like I said, you usually play him one turn because if you can't protect the kid, then you'll lose, right? You can't protect him like in those matchups, you will lose, which is why you play him so that you keep the Dawn for next turn, so that you can play cards like Pump Gibson. So we're running 2 Pump Gibson still. Easy card to play around, but it is 4k power for the counter, and it can stop blockers. It can stop against blue in particular. They have a lot of 4 costs, so they'll be swinging with cards like Mihawk and Pacifista and stuff. It'll like mess up their order. I can hit their blockers with this card. So against established board states, Punk Gibson is very potent, and it's just a clincher to make blue like really not be able to get over the 8 cost kid, because they kind of have to swing wide, especially if you have a lot of blockers, which is also why we're playing the 3 law, we have the 3 law, the 7-drop kid. It's like if you play them in the matchup, it's just like very difficult for the opponent suddenly, because the more blockers you have to stop, if you have blockers, they're forced to swing wide, and if they swing wide, they're losing to cards like Punk Gibson really hard. And of course, we also have the Paradise Waterfall, which you can use on the 8-drop kid as well. One of the reasons as to why actually the 8-drop kid is really bad in the purple matchup is because they are not able to swing at your life anymore, which is actually something you want them to do. In the purple matchup, like having life is kind of a liability because the leader ability can just banish the last life. So if you can take the life earlier, it'll actually be pretty convenient for you. So because you like get the extra card. Uh, However, like I said, you're mostly playing this not for purple. You don't play this in purple. You trash this in your hand so that you can swing with your leader again in purple. Uh, the Punk Gibson really strong. He just wins blue and red for you if you see him like early enough. It's just you have to play this card at 3. He's really really strong. I mean, I guess you could play all 7s, but I mean, good luck against blue. I guess you could still probably beat red, assuming your board control's on point. But against blue, I would say good luck. But this is the final deck profile that I have. I was on an X1 streak for the longest time with the previous list because of the mirror match and because of purple. And so again, this is, if I were to say that the previous one was kind of balanced around being ready for all matchups, this one is kind of more balanced for the competitive metagame that we are kind of currently existing in. And so now that I have my 5th winter card, I'm actually going to be branching out a little bit in terms of my decks. The next thing I'm going to be trying to play is going to be Red Luffy. The starter deck, Red Luffy. So, I mean, if you guys are interested in a deck profile like that, let me know. If you have any questions about the deck profile or want my thoughts or discuss, the comment section down below. Perfect place to go. Yeah, guys, this has been my deck profile. I mean, this is the deck that won me my last winter card, and I've been seeing like pretty strong success with it regardless. So, I mean, there you go. Guys, have a good one.